Thank you very much to the panel for very enlightening information and knowledge. I'm going to try and do this very quickly because I have 5 questions. First, the notion of hypocrisy that Mustafa talked about, because for me, the examples given was more about the impact of moral policing, enforced moral policing within the state, rather than hypocrisy within the individual citizens per se, taking off the hijab and all that. Because my understanding of hypocrisy, at least in this country, is, for example, Islamic religious officers who arrest the transgender people and then have them stripped and then touch their breasts and things like that. So I think, and then turn around and say that it's okay because it's between 2 men, and yet homosexuality is considered a sin. So, it's very confusing for me. So that's one question. The other question is the notion of harm. Again to Mustafa, because here seems to be this authoritarian kind of understanding of harm where you may influence other people or you will confuse other people, if you use the word Allah and things like that. So I would like to also understand your own notion of harm to someone else. Your question, is it a sin or a crime? The third question is this whole thing around national identity and nationalism. Have you ever witnessed or seen or experienced where national identity, this whole thing about pursuing a national identity and nationalism, whether diversity has a space in that? Because in Malaysia, it doesn't seem to have a space. To Azmi, I wanted to shoot out 2 questions to you. Do we need a constitutional court? Would that undermine our understanding of what exactly is within the Constitution? Because the Constitution, for me, is already under attack quite severely as the supreme law of the land. And then, how do Muslims feel being under 2 laws? You're basically subjected to 2 different sets of laws. And is there actually I think it may even be called like some kind of double jeopardy, because you sort of doubly, criminalize, because we know the Sharia law is expanding in terms of its jurisdiction. It's no longer family law, it's criminalizing people, even criminalizing non-Muslims, certain words we can't use and things like that. So just very quickly, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Angela Cook with us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the questions. Very interesting questions, and thanks to the questions, I'm learning new facts about Malaysia as well. Of course, hypocrisy is a very wide concept, and there are many examples of hypocrisy. I said in Saudi Arabia, the imposition of religion creates hypocrisy, but that's not the only form of hypocrisy, of course. I mean, you can be hypocritical in the sense that you are afraid from government pressure, so you do this, a religious practice, just to get away from government pressure. From an Islamic point of view, that's not a heartfelt, that's not ikhlas, the true wish to serve Allah. You do this out of pressure. Maybe the person who's hypocritical is not the person, maybe the real hypocrite is who pushes that person. But I'm just saying that forcing people to be religious doesn't lead to genuine piety. At best, it can create hypocrisy in that sense. But yes, there are many other examples of hypocrisy. And sometimes we see hypocrisy. What does hypocrisy mean? It is trying to show yourself different, more ethical, more moral, more righteous than you really are, and trying to gain something based on that. I mean, if you are saying, if you're a politician, and if you are showing that you're going to prayers regularly and you're a very good Muslim and you're hoping that this will give you more votes, that's hypocrisy. You don't have to hide your practice, of course, if you're really doing it. You can be proud of it. But if you're practicing something, if you're speaking the language of religion, especially you can be a businessman, you can be a politician, you can be somebody who benefits from this. That would be another form of hypocrisy. Another form of hypocrisy that we can find in our tradition and in other religious traditions is that you try to almost fool God by following the letter of the word, but going against the intentions of law. For example, in Pakistan, there has been a few cases of a young lady being raped by a group of men, and then she gets pregnant, and then she is stoned to death for adultery because she cannot show 4 witnesses that she is raped. Now, this is a very hypocritical usage of Islamic law. In Islamic law, adultery is a crime, not stoning according to the Quran, but that's hudud. The other thing is, in the Surah Al-Nur, the verse about, in the initial verses about adultery, it says, whomever claims that there is adultery should bring 4 witnesses. And if a woman says she's still clean, and you cannot bring 4 witnesses, you should be silent. So it is to protect women from libels of adultery. This is the intention of the law. Allah, when you read the verses, you can understand the divine intention is about the protection of women from a libel of adultery, which is very common in all cultures. But those people, those men, whoever those are in that case, rape a woman, make her pregnant, and then kill her by using Islamic law in the most hypocritical way imaginable. So they turn into the law, which is about, whose intention is a protection of women, into something that is actually oppression of women and of course venerating their own ego and interests. In that sense, hypocritical interpretation of the law is a problem, and that's why in Islamic law we have a lot of focus on the letter of the word, how it is written and what it says. But the maqasid, the intentions of Sharia, are often forgotten. Whereas it's a very important school of thought, the maqasid, the intentions of Sharia. According to Imam Shatibi, in the 14th century he lived, he wrote this book, Maqasid al-Sharia. He said, Islamic law is all about protecting 5 values: life, religion, property, lineage, and the intellect. If your Sharia doesn't protect these values, but actually violates them because you use it in a way which goes against this intention, that's another form of hypocrisy as well. There are many examples of hypocrisy. I just wanted to give a particular case in the Saudi example. But I agree with, I don't know what happens with transgender people and how police touch them. I just learned that right here. I'll check on that as well. As for the notion of harm, of course it's a good, you pointed out, well, physical harm. Or, if you say, this person will be harmed if that person holds on to this idea, so I'm protecting this person from that idea, that's not the harm I'm talking about. If you go and attack that person, if you threaten that person, if you kill, torture, beat that person, a physical harm, that's a harm. Of course, there can be psychological harm. You can abuse, you can insult, you can put stuff about internet. There's also a notion of abuse as well. But if we accept the legitimacy of protecting people from harmful ideas, this is a very dangerous exception because others will use this against Muslims elsewhere. We should defend principles in a way which will be universally legitimate. For example, there was an Islamic scholar in Turkey who recently wrote that in Turkey, the majority are good, pious Muslims. There are some people who drink and who live very un-Islamic lives. They're the minority, so they should conform to the values of the majority. They should not do these things in a visible way. Now, I wrote an article saying that, okay, if that's a universal principle, should we defend this principle in France as well, where the majority of French society is Christian or secular, not even Christian, post-Christian. They all eat pork and drink wine, and so should Muslims conform to that by not trying to eat halal food? No, we there defend individual rights, minority rights. So we should be principled, and we should not allow governments to protect us from harmful ideas, whereas that can be used against Muslims, against our own people when they're in the minority. However, of course, there can be harmful ideas in society, and we can first campaign against that. Racism is a harmful idea, I think. Hate speech is a harmful idea. As someone who writes and shares ideas, I have a responsibility to criticize that. So on the level of criticism, we have a responsibility and right. And finally, on the governmental level, of course, governments ban what they call hate speech in different levels, and that's, of course, understandable. If someone comes out and say, kill all the Muslims in this country, kill all the Chinese in this country, they're evil, if you agitate people against that, that's also a very called clear to violence. That can be also, I think, banned because you have a direct call to violence. But other than that, free flow of ideas, I think, is the medium. And one more thing. In our Muslim world, governments and also more authoritarian-minded Muslims generally think that if there's a harmful idea that's out there, a wrong idea, we should ban it. Otherwise, it will spread. It will poison all of us. Like if we hear about some atheistic thoughts, we will be all atheists next day, so we should put them in prison and silence them. Why are we afraid? Let them say what they think, and let's refute them. Let's show them that they're wrong. That's what free speech is all about. To defend free speech, we don't have to accept every idea. We actually defend free speech because we think, I'm not afraid if you have some thoughts from your behalf, and if you're a Christian, if you want to share your faith, I'm not afraid. As a Muslim, I think I know what you're talking about, and I think I have some Islamic arguments which actually are more persuasive than yours, so let's talk about this. So if you have self-confidence, there is no reason to think that we will be defeated. Sometimes people say, oh, they are so well educated, we are not good enough to match with them. Then let's educate ourselves. And don't forget, you can't start to swim unless you jump in the pool. You have to engage in this dialogue. I've heard this a lot from when they say, oh, Christians have very educated priests. They have a lot of information and they fool our people. Then let's just not sit all day and do nothing, and let's educate our imams and our religious leaders and ourselves and get. So that should be where the effort would be. Otherwise, we would be always, if you protect something too much, you stop it from developing. You should allow competition, and if you're confident about yourself, you should not be, especially as Muslims, we claim that Islam is the most persuasive, logical, rational faith, right? So why should we be afraid from a reasoned debate? We don't have to convince everybody, but I think we can make a good case for our religion. And let's not forget that the biggest ideas in the Islamic world came when Muslims faced different ideas and argued about them. We are very proud of Farabi, Ibn Sina, all the Islamic thinkers in the Middle Ages. They read Aristotle, thought about it, interpreted Aristotle, argued against some of his arguments, and that's why they created something in world history, Ibn Rushd and all the great thinkers. If we are afraid from the world, we will not contribute to the world. Sorry, As for national identity, we should not be misled to think that a part of a nation, even a dominant part of a nation, equals that nation. For example, in Turkey, is Turkey a country of Turks only? No, we have Kurds who don't speak Turkish. Well, they speak Turkish because they're educated in Turkish. Their mother language is not Turkish, it's Kurdish. There's a language called Kurdish. I can't speak Kurdish, it's a different language. At least some 15% of Turkey are Kurds. Our government made the stupid mistake of denying that they exist and enforcing them to conform to Turkish values for decades, which created a lot of turmoil in Turkish society. Even terrorist campaign by some fanatic Kurds against the government and a harsh government response. Turkey is a country of Turks, Kurds, and many others. We have Armenians, Jews, and all these peoples. And that is the richness of Turkey. Today, Turkish cuisine is good, generally, Malaysian cuisine is wonderful too, but Turkish cuisine is bad. Because it's not just Turkish cuisine, actually. It is the food of the Turks and Bosniaks and Albanians who became Turkified over time. The best kebabs are from Kurdish, restaurants. The Diyarbakir and all those, and some Arab food. So and Turkey is a nation of all this diversity. We should not try to put the stamp on everybody on the nation. And this is the nation of these people. No, it is those people and some other people as well. And national identity should be encompassing all of those. Here's again, the American model is not bad in the sense that you can be an American and Irish, American Italian, American African now as they call it, you know, the black people. And of course there's a national, for example, you can be a Malaysian and Malay, right? But you can be Malaysian and Chinese, it's also in your country. But we should be, that's not a threat. That is a richness that will make that nation more colorful, and people will share different things and learn different things from each other. That's how and national identity should be constructed in a way that which appreciates this diversity, not fears from this diversity. That's what I think. Thank you.
Angela, is it? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your questions. You asked, do we need a constitutional court? Well, I'll answer this by a little colorful analogy. If you take the engine of a Proton Saga and put it in the body of a Jaguar, you still have an awful car. It's not the court that we need, it's the judges. If you have a constitutional court and you fill it with the same kinds of judges that we have today, it's still going to come out with awful bloody decisions. So it's not the courts. It's not the creation of constitutional courts. It's the quality of the judges. And the only way that we can improve the quality of our judges is to ensure that all future judges are my students. But the second question is about how does being Muslim. The thing is, we've always had a split legal system. It's not something new, yeah. Because when when we had the federated states and we had the non-federated states, etc., and the British were influencing the legal system in the country already, even then, yeah, matters of religion and custom was in the hands of the sultans and whatever system that they had, and all other matters were under English law. So we've always had that split personality. Yeah, which maybe answers a lot of questions about why Malaysians are so weird. But anyway, so we've always had this split personality, and I think that by and large, right, a lot of the stuff which is under Sharia jurisdiction isn't really particularly controversial to Muslims over here, right? Matters of family law, marriage, divorce, inheritance, etc. I don't think that's much of a That's not an issue. But what you're talking about is the criminalizing of, and that can become an issue. Right? And like I said in my speech, at the end of the day, you see, whatever laws you make, it has to be within the confines of the protection of the Constitution. And that is the problem. Because the courts don't challenge it, our executive doesn't challenge it. There's a great fear to challenge anything with the word Islam in it. Because suddenly you are an apostate, you are murtad, you are evil, and all the rest of it. Let me give you an example. Yeah, I didn't realize this until I started doing research. That I have committed so many crimes. The Federal Territories of Putrajaya Extension and Modification of Sharia Criminal Offences, Federal Territories Act 1997, Section 14. Any male person being baligh who fails to perform the Friday prayers in a mosque within his career for 3 consecutive weeks without uzur shari'i or without any reasonable cause shall be guilty of an offense and shall on conviction be liable to a fine not exceeding 1,000 ringgit or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months. Or both. Now, who on earth is going to, do I have a particular officer from Jawi who follows me every Friday to make sure that I go? No, of course not. But these laws exist, and they're not questioned. Surely this goes against my freedom of religion, my own freedom of religion to choose how I want to practice my religion. And the freedom of religion was confirmed in the case of Jalaluddin Osman versus the public prosecutor in 1988. Where Jalaluddin was a Muslim man, born into a Muslim family, raised as a Muslim, but converted to Christianity, and he was detained under the Internal Security Act. And the court held that the detention under the Internal Security Act was unconstitutional because all he was doing was living to the rights allowed to him under Article 11 of the Constitution, which is his freedom of religion. So we have the freedom of religion, but we have laws, which are actually, in my point of view, extremely oppressive. But it's not challenged, and that's a problem.
Yeah, any other questions? We'll get the ladies from here first. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, I'm Alma from Kosovo. Well, I appreciate the distinction between secularity and secularism. And based on observing a lot of discussion going on, because secularism, I mean, the idea of secularism nowadays is a very important discussion going on. So what I'm trying to figure out is basically whenever we have this discussion, as you mentioned, we have a lot of cases from Islamic history whereby we can prove that the social phenomena at that time was very tolerant and very, how to say, inclusive of various ethnicities, various religious denominations, and so on. Especially when you look at Ottoman Empire experience, like I'm from Balkans, you have this Slavoj Žižek, he had a paper last time basically telling that until Ottoman Empire fell in Balkans, people were living in harmony, and there was tolerance, and there was mutual inclusiveness and all that. But the moment that Islamic Ottomans went out of Balkans, then the bloodshed started and a lot of other issues which we are living up to today. So now my question is, since we have these realities lived of social tolerance in our history, why we don't have a concept that would basically refer to those social realities? Why we still have today, when we talk about secularism, I still have to use this word, right? I still have, even though I distinguish between French secularity or US secularity or whatever other secularity we use, and the confusion between us as Muslims today when we discuss this is basically all about terminology. I mean, I have seen panels like this whereby people talk about the same thing, they use different terms, and there is a whole mess going on. Because when I discuss these ideas with other colleagues, or I have a difficulty to convince them that we had these social realities, but we don't have a concept to refer to these social realities. Why we do have to use these secularism concepts? Why we don't have, let's say, an Ottoman term or an Arab term? There would be an equivalent of these social realities. And if we don't have, then how come we don't have? Or perhaps we don't know. There exists, but we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm glad that you're from Kosovo, and very good to find someone from Kosovo here. My wife is from Bosnia, so I'm very connected to the Balkans in that sense. And in Kosovo, there has been some bans on hijab in some institutions, right? I think not as big as in Turkey, but that's also concerning. That's a modern threat to religious freedom. Maybe we can discuss that in the afternoon. Of course, we can find different names for the concepts. But I also am not offended in taking a concept from a different civilization. These are universal values. Let's not forget that, I mean, what do you call this in Malay? Microphone? Okay, is it an Arabic or Muslim term? No, it's an English term, microphone. Why is it English? They made this. I mean, if we made this, we would call it Abdul Rahman or something, but it's microphone because they made it. I mean, some concepts developed in the West before we did. They took many concepts from us in the past. That's why there are many English words, as I said, algebra, alchemy, almanac, algorithm comes from, al-Kharazmi and so on and so forth. So civilizations use different terms. For example, the term democracy has been an issue in the Muslim world for a long time. Many Islamic movements rejected democracy, saying that it's a foreign concept. Well, Ottoman Empire had many foreign concepts. They took some Byzantine concepts and institutions. This is because they came after the Byzantine. Early Islamic civilization, when fiqh was being developed by Imam Abu Hanifa or Shafi, they borrowed from some legal pre-existing Egyptian or Byzantine traditions, for example. They look at how system works, they put an Islamic meaning to it, they reinterpreted it, but they, for example, architecture. You know the Ottoman architecture, dome, minarets, beautiful. Well, we took it partly from the Byzantines. I mean, look at Hagia Sophia in the Ottoman Empire. If you go to Istanbul, you see everybody visits the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia, Saint Sophia. But Hagia Sophia is a church converted into mosque, and the dome, the particular shape of the dome, they made it, the Byzantines. We converted, then we took that, and we developed that. Mimar Sinan developed that, and he built similar. So there's no harm in taking a concept if that person made this. But of course, we should look at that concept, see if it fits our values. We can find parallelisms between our concept and those values. And to name it democracy or the people's rule, or we can change different names, but it's not that important. There was a time when democracy was seen as kufr by many Islamists, saying that sovereignty belongs to Allah and people's sovereignty. Of course, sovereignty belongs to Allah, but Allah has given us, every individual, a reason and a will to choose about our lives and political systems, and we are using that. That's why it's not a violation of Allah's sovereignty. It's Allah made us Khalifa as his representatives on earth, and that's why every individual has a certain reason, and putting that into action is democracy. So it's not a foreign concept. Therefore, I'm all for finding links between our values and global values, but I'm not offended to take something. I mean, I eat sushi. It's called, I mean, they called it sushi. I don't call it something else. I eat sushi. But I say alhamdulillah when I eat sushi too. It doesn't matter. So in that sense, we should be able to be global and grounded in our faith at the same time and create syntheses, and that's how the Islamic civilization will grow, as it did, in the medieval era. That's how I would look at that concept. And for secularism, we can call it something else. In Turkey, sometimes we use the term neutral state. We want a neutral, non-partisan state. A state which will not support the conservatives against the secularists or secularists against the conservatives. A state which will respect everybody, so you will have the right to live. We could call it a neutral state, or call it secular. Secularism is a loaded term, and so I see the problem there. That's why I sometimes avoid that, and I speak of a liberal neutral state.
Thank you, Mr. Talker. Yes, the brother first here. After this, we take two questions. First, second one. Yeah.
My name is Azahar. This topic, freedom of conscience. Now, Brother Mustafa just now talked about this individual rights, which we treasure very much. And then we have the state, who always act like a big brother, doing something good on our behalf, decide things on our behalf. So I'm trying to pose a question here. People always say, or the state would always say, we always look at things in the bigger picture, not the small picture. So here comes the conflict between individual rights versus collective rights. And in a democratic country, the state actually represents the people who are elected once every 4 years or 5 years. So this dilemma between individual rights and collective rights, how do we, manage these differences, And individual rights might differ from one individual to another, but collectively, it might be good for the nation and the people as a whole. So how do we tackle such issues here?
Yeah, a very good question, Mr. Azhar. Thank you so much. The next one, this one? Yep. Thanks.
Good day. My name is Vignesheshwaran. I have few things to clarify here. Okay. First of all, the question is to Dr. Farooq. Okay. Earlier, I think you made reference to one of the chapter in Mustafa's book on freedom to sin. All right. Okay. I would presume that you meant good. All right, when you made the statement with regards to the issue of homosexuality and freedom of sin, okay? The question that I have, or what I would like to clarify over here is that, okay, a lot of time we talk about how discrimination takes place or opposition of views takes place and so on, and at the same time, we tend to do the same act that we oppose, okay? Likewise, when you label homosexuality as a sin in Islam, all right, okay, is it really the actual view of Islam on that matter? Or is there a differential view on the same issue, okay? Because definitely, to a certain extent, I'm aware of some scholars or some activists who seem to quote verses from the Quran or verses from the Hadith which supports or in a way which doesn't make or doesn't call homosexuality as a sin, all right? So if we are talking about, okay, the freedom to sin and we label things such as homosexuality as a sin just because we believe so and we assume others would have to follow those views, I think we are making the same old mistake that we are fighting against, okay? And then the second one is with regards to what's happening here in Malaysia, and I would like to get the view from Mustafa, okay? This morning, I was made aware by my friend that there's this article where it talks about ISMA, okay, this is one of the NGO that represents Muslims, and another Muslim NGO which actually called for aggressive reaction towards Komango, towards non-Muslims who seems to be a threat to Islam in Malaysia, okay, and they used statements like, they said, oh, even the Prophet did at some point waged war, and therefore we should do so. And Ismail also said that, for example, recently some of us organized this show of solidarity in the churches in Malaysia, and we actually said that a lot of Muslims here in this country do not share the same view that the state seem to have with regards to the use of the word Allah and so on, okay? And therefore we went in peace, offering flowers and sweets and things as such to show that Islam is a religion of peace, all right? And then here is this NGO which claims to represent Islam, and it seems to say that, okay, no, you shouldn't do that, okay? In this case, Christians and the non-Muslims are a threat, and therefore let's act aggressively, okay? The problem that we have over here is that, I mean, we are aware that a lot of Muslims do not agree with such view, okay? But why are they silent? Why? I mean, earlier, I think Azmi Shahrul mentioned about people being afraid of being labeled as apostates and whatnot. But isn't Islam is about peace? Isn't Islam is about justice? And would you not fight for the right of the others just because they don't belong to your faith? Okay? And this can be seen in the letter that the Prophet wrote to the people, okay, in Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, where he called the Muslims to protect for the rights of the non-Muslims in the face of threats and so on. So maybe we can have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the first question was about collective versus individual rights. I'm of the belief that individual rights are always supreme than any collective right. But collective rights also exist by the consent and the will of the individuals. What do we mean by this? For example, there can be a collective right? For example, if you are a certain community in a country which wants education in your own mother language, you can ask from the state, we want the collective right to have schools in this language, and the government has to give this because we're a collective body here. And the government can, acknowledge that. In that sense, besides respecting individuals' certain rights, governments have the notion of collective rights. Certain communities in certain countries gain these rights generally by a democratic process. In Turkey, for example, now you can have Kurdish classes elective in high schools. The government, if you want Kurdish, should be able to give you Kurdish. If you speak Sanskrit, you can be an individual, but you don't have many other people who have that. So you can still speak, but you don't have the collective right to have that from the government. In that sense, it's a democratic process, but one thing about collective rights is that it should strengthen individual rights as an individual, a lot of people, but it should not go over individual rights. For example, if the community says, well, we are such a community that we kill anybody who leaves us, that's our collective right to punish the individual for apostasy, then that collective right would be violating the individual's right to have the freedom of conscience. Therefore, it's a kind of a matter of balance, and I think the real persons out there in the world are human beings, individuals. These individuals create communities, but communities come and go, they can change. As an individual, you can enter this community, that community. As a human being, you are the only one, from a legal point of view, from a universal human rights point of view, from an Islamic point of view as well. Because you go to Akhirat in Islam, afterlife, as an individual. You have a personal account with God, and God will personally judge you on your deeds according to Islam. So in that sense, I think the individual person is most important, and then collective rights can be something which comes from the collective will of the individuals, but which cannot overcome the individuals. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but does it help? Okay. The other issue, this homosexuality issue also you mentioned, and which came as a question. I think that we have a right to disapprove certain things. And to tolerate things, we don't have to necessarily approve them. Let's say gambling. I think gambling is a wrong thing. It's immoral. You win money out of luck, and that's not right. I disapprove people who gamble. But they can. I'm not going to attack them for doing that. I don't necessarily call the government to ban every gambling. It's a matter of, okay, it's banned in some countries, it's not. Or alcohol. I can disapprove alcohol morally. I think it's a bad thing. I can have that opinion, but that person can drink that. I can even call on to that person, that's a bad thing, I think you should not, I can have that. So to tolerate things, we don't have to approve things. With matters of sexual morality, I think every religion, including Islam, has certain morals. And of course, the mainstream view is that homosexuality is unacceptable from Islamic morals. There are people who think it is, and that's a matter of interpretation. If somebody's persuaded that way, they can think that way, that's fine. I'm not going to impose on them. But the majority view is that from an Islamic point of view, homosexuality is morally problematic, at the very least. It's something that God did not want us to do, and that's not the way human... And why are people homosexual? That's a different discussion, but from an Islamic point of view, the fact that we think like this doesn't mean that we will attack homosexuals or ban them or torture them or kill them or put in prison or something. We can disapprove, but those people can live the way they are because they're the way they are. And how to, of course, approach homosexuality from Islam. Is it innate? Is it inborn? Is it acquired? These are all different questions. Christians are struggling with the same issues as well. I would just say that, and by the way, we cannot ask people not to consider things as sin. They can consider things as sin. For example, a very hardcore Salafi Muslim would think that we are committing a sin here by sitting all together, male and female, mixed in the same physical space. Now, I don't think like that. If can they think like that? They can think like that. Can they come and impose that on it? They shouldn't do that. So people can have all different notions. In the chapter Freedom to Sin, I'm not condoning sin. I'm not saying let people sin, it's ooh, great. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that whatever we think as sin should not be imposed on them by us. We can disapprove things that are sinful. And of course, the definition of sin changes from one community to another, one scholar to another. For example, handshakes between males and females, let's say. Some very conservative Muslims think that handshakes between women and men, it's sinful because you touch the other person's body after all. Hayrettin Karaman, a mainstream Hanafi Islamic scholar in Turkey, said, well, in the old days, nobody shook hands, so Islamic scholars considered that it's a sexual act. Today, it's become a custom, there's no sexual meaning to it, so it's fine. I think like him. So I do. But others can think still, oh, we shouldn't do this. Then they don't do that. It's okay, you know. But they should not come and impose what they think. So that's the, I think, definition. But people can have different ideas about these things. And people can think, oh, it's the most horrible thing. It's an opinion. And the third thing was, sorry, it's just the word Allah and, sorry, who asked that? And, you asked that, okay, sorry, again. Why Muslims are silent? Well, on the issue of using the word Allah by Christians, I wrote an article, and I think it was published in a Malaysian, I wrote it in Turkey, but in English. I think you cannot ban people from using certain words to refer to Allah. And it's, I mean, from an Islamic point of view, first of all, Christians, the Quran emphasizes that Muslims and Christians and Jews worship in the same Allah, although the Trinitarian view is rejected by Islam. We don't approve that. But still, the Quran emphasizes that we all believe in the God of Abraham. That's one thing. Secondly, Arab Christians use the word Allah for centuries. It's not an issue. In Turkey, Turkish Christians often use the word Allah. We don't think that they're doing something heretical. Third, again, as I said, if we are going to have principles, they should be universal. Now, if we're going to say, when they use the word Allah, people get misled, so let's ban them because of that mislead. So what if then a Christian country say, if Muslims use the word Jesus, Isa, our Christians will get confused. So let's ban Muslims from uttering the word Jesus or Isa. Will we say, okay, very good idea? We're not going to say that because we respect Prophet Isa. He's Jesus. I mean, he's in our Quran and it's a part of our. So we don't. If they're confused, let them not be confused. You know, it's their problem. I mean, if people get confused by what you say, that should not be the basis of a ban. So I'm not sympathetic with that ban, obviously. Although I respect the laws of Malaysia, I mean, I'm a visitor here in this country. I respect what the government does, but I think from an Islamic point of view, if people ask me, I don't approve bans like that. Why Muslims are silent? Well, several things. In our cultures in general, harmony is always emphasized rather than diversity and different opinions. And if there are different opinions, we're afraid that it will lead to some chaos and some confusion and so on and so forth. It is not coming from Islam, it's just in our geography, generally authoritarian governments said, we don't need too many ideas, we should know what is truth and we should follow the truth. Who knows the truth? Of course the government knows the truth, or the authorities know the truth. So we should follow it. I mean, this is a pattern, and we have secular versions of that, we have Islamic versions of that. And this is an internalized pattern. That's one reason why people probably don't speak out. I mean, they say, it's not my thing, let the government or let the authorities, whoever they are, decide this. Second thing, of course, there's a concern of being stigmatized. There's a concern by saying, oh, you are a traitor, you're a heretic, or you are unpatriotic. I mean, these accusations very often take place. In Turkey too, I mean, we have sometimes these accusations. Oh, you're a traitor to the homeland. No, I'm not a traitor. I just think that homeland will be better, Turkey will be a better country if we take not this route, but that route. In all these ideas to ban the main reason for banning or limiting freedom of speech is the presumption that someone already has the right answer. If somebody already knows what is the good, why do we need nonsense, freedom of speech? It's a lot of buzz. It will distract us. We should follow the truth. And who knows the truth? Well, if you tell me Prophet Muhammad knows, I would say, okay, I agree. But I'm not living in the same century and age, and I can go and ask him anything directly. You say, Islamic scholars know the truth? I said, which Islamic scholars? Whose interpretation? Okay, if I think this Islamic scholar knows the truth, I can follow him. That would be my choice. You can think that the other Islamic scholar knows the truth. Somebody else can say, well, sorry, I'm not following Islamic scholars. I'm just following whatever I want. Or maybe I'm just not even following any, I'm a Muslim but not following the scholars, but reading the Quran and making my ideas. That's another approach. So, and the truth will be ultimately decided in the community, in the nation, by all the different ideas. And the thing about freedom of speech is that if your idea is right, then it will prevail. Let's discuss. And if you're fearful of freedom of speech, maybe you have a problem with the strength of your idea, or maybe your confidence in it.
Yeah, all right. I think we'll take one last question before we adjourn for lunch. Is there any burning question? Yep, please. Or two more questions then. That says finish it off.
Hi, my name is Robert Fu. I'm basically from the financial background. So,
We can't hear you well, sorry.
yeah, I'm basically from the financial background. So typically in the financial background, you have this Islamic financial planning, so to speak, or Islamic banking and all that. And it's literally the rage in Malaysia because Malaysia claims to be the biggest Islamic banking center in the world and things like that. I have a problem with that because when I was talking to one scholar, I mean, not necessarily a very famous scholar, and I was talking to him and I said, how do I, as a person who is doing financial planning, do Islamic financial planning? So I said, in Malaysia, when you talk about Islamic financial planning, you're talking about basically the sukuk products and all those kind of so-called Islamic products. But I said, I think Islamic financial planning is actually planning your life, which means your value systems has to be Islamic too. So when I actually went down to discuss it with him, he literally got lost because he couldn't see that when you talk about planning for the person's life, it involves his values about how he derives his income, how he spends his money, where he places his money, how he distributes his money, and all that kind of thing. So I want to know your comments about Islamic financial planning. Is it really Islamic financial planning, or is it just a label? Okay, because if you talk about real Islamic financial planning, you're talking about the whole concept, about the concept of charity and all those things coming in. But the way Islamic financial planning is done is like, it's just a commercial thing. It's just like, it's non-riba, and that's it. Yeah, that's one question. The second question is that, what's your opinion about, because I come from the days when I had many Malay friends and Muslim friends coming to my house and they eat and all that. Nowadays, they don't come to my house. And it's also because, rightly or wrongly, it's probably because there's this fear, that if they were to come and eat in my house, then, they may come in contact with pork and the utensils are not clean enough. And that's why you find that some hotels will have like a halal kitchen and a non-halal kitchen, and you go into that extreme, so much so that in supermarkets you have anything that's non-halal is pushed to one corner, and everything has to be halal. So what about the rights of the people who want to take non-halal stuff because of their culture and whatnot? So what's your comment on this?
Thank you. We have one last question. Yes, no? Yep.
My name is Sim. I'm an atheist, but I'm very interested in the developments of all the religions, and I respect them. But there are certain aspects which really worry me. And I'm making a comparison between the Catholic Church and Islam. Now, to me, the Catholic Church, it's very clear. There is a Pope who has a direct line with the Almighty, and he makes pronouncements which have to be followed. But what I'm curious about is that in Islam, you have your Muslim councils, your fatwa councils, and I've always been told that the fatwa councils and the fatwas that are made are basically advisory. they are not opinions or laws that can be imposed even on Muslims. Can you clarify that? There seems to have been a change that fatwa councils and fatwas are now considered laws. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good questions. First of all, on financial planning, I don't know well what Islamic financial planning means. I know Islamic finance, and of course the biggest difference between Islamic finance and the other finance, the secular finance, is the difference between riba versus non-riba. Of course, whether modern bank interest is exactly riba or not is also disputed by some scholars. And I think we need maybe some reinterpretation of the term riba on that. Because we live in an age where there's inflation and the money loses its value over time if you don't invest. So there should be a change of that. I mean, that reality should change the way we understand riba. But whatever, many Muslims feel more comfortable in using a non-riba bank. That's Islamic banking. So there's a difference there. Turkish scholar Murat Çizakça has a good book, who actually teaches in Malaysia, Islamic Capitalism and Finance. He explains how, I mean, Islam has its own capitalistic history in the sense of free markets and private enterprise, and financing the entrepreneur has been the Islamic norm. So there's that difference there. But when it comes to planning, I don't know, when you make the plans, what it be different from Islamic versus un-Islamic version? I mean, we Muslims love to put a label Islamic to everything, like an Islamic car versus an un-Islamic car. But it works in the same principles. I mean, what would be the difference? I mean, of course, you can drive the car with an Islamic consciousness versus an un-Islamic consciousness. You can say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and you can think how God created oil, fuel, and the blessings and everything. That would be, instead of having the consciousness though, we want to put the label, oh, this is the Islamic one versus the... So I think we are too focused on creating Islamic version of everything. Like there is this tradition called the Islamization of knowledge, or Islamic chemistry. Well, chemistry is chemistry. You know, you can have an Islamic interpretation of that, saying that this is how Allah created this amazing periodical table, and how they interact shows a design, and from that design you can build an argument for Allah, and you can say, look at the marvelous creation. But chemistry is chemistry, where you're Hindu or Muslim or something else, or an atheist. It will work in the same way. So instead of creating the Islamic version of everything, I think we should encompass and be open to the world with keeping our Islamic consciousness. And that would be the maybe better approach to these things. But I don't know the exact details of Islamic planning, so I'm not going to say too much about that. As for halal food, well, I think I'm not against having a halal kitchen versus non-halal kitchen. I mean, in Turkey, for example, in Turkey, pork is very rare. Almost nobody eats pork, but in very luxurious restaurants now, the fashionable Western, there are a few pork dishes, and they will warn you, there's a pork, and there's a... I want to see that sign because I don't want to eat pork. So I want to note that this is pork. So, and of course, pious Muslims want to make sure that they have a halal, which there's no pork in it. Whereas you're a non-Muslim, you don't care about it, so you want to get it. So it is normal that you have these differences. And in a hotel, there can be a, I mean, if you go to Israel, I mean, I don't know if you've been to, there's like a strict kosher part, that's for sure. If you're not caring about that, you can maybe go to the other part. It's normal, I think, to have these things. The problem would be to make one standard universally apply to everybody. In France, for example, they said, we don't want to have this halal food restaurants. Why? Oh, everybody should eat the way the French do. That's an imposition of the French way, whatever that is. If there's a legitimate French way, it would be tolerating everybody, and you could be a good Muslim and who doesn't wine and dine and still do it. So I think there's a danger of imposing any of these on each other, and that therefore I value diversity. As for the Catholic Church, and the question was exactly... Oh, yeah. Islam is actually, of course, not like Catholicism, and that's one of the reasons why we Muslims are proud. We don't have a pope. There is no central authority. So, but we love to have the popes, you know, in some sense, let's go and ask. Yes, fatwas are opinions. So a fatwa is basically somebody comes, ask a Muslim scholar, if X person and Y person do this, what is Islamic? And that scholar looks at that case and here's my opinion, he reads other books, and he gives an opinion on that particular issue. It's not a law. Are laws based on fatwas? Well, they can be. The Ottoman Empire, for example, created a legal, a modern law codification called Mejelle in the 19th century. They look at Hanafi fatwas and even other fatwas, getting inspiration from those fatwas, but also modern legal systems. The Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Ottoman Empire created a Mejelle, pretty modern legal system. So fatwa can inspire a law, but it's not a law in itself. And the other thing is, one Islamic scholar give this fatwa, the other Islamic scholar give another fatwa, and the state can get inspiration from these if it's in the constitution, but the state also has to see that some citizens are not Muslim, some citizens are not accepting that fatwa. So it should not be, the fatwa should be binding on people who believe in the legitimacy of that scholar. If I respect Imam Qaradawi, his fatwas are important for me. If I don't, I don't. You know, if I'm a follower of that, Imam, his fatwas should be, but making it the basis of a national law is generally problematic because not everybody agrees with the scholar's perception. So they can inform law, but they should not be substituted as law, I think. Because we live in nation states which are diverse. Even in Medina, Muslims and Jews had their thing, their own different fatwas, if you will. I mean, the fatwa is not used, but the nation state of Medina had a higher level of unity, and the Muslim fatwa would not be applied for the Jews. In such diverse societies of today, where Muslims also in themselves very diverse, plus we live with other people, national law should be, regarding everybody's general interests. Good? Thank you so much. See you after lunch, inshallah.